Hello class. So our topic for today is about the basic concepts of forensic chemistry. So forensic comes from the Latin word forensis, which means public to the forum or public discussion. It is argumentative, rhetorical, belonging to debate or discussion. The modern definition is belonging to or used in a suitable court of justice or to public discussion or debate. Um, you will most likely see the concept of forensic, when our technical persons from, for example, the crime laboratory attends in court to explain about the examinations they have conducted on the specimens that were brought to the laboratory. Okay. So, forensic science is an application of scientific principles to criminal and civil laws that are enforced by police agencies in the criminal justice system. So, hindi lang naman crime laboratory yung nagkakandak ng mga scientific principles. Meron tayo dyan ibang law enforcement agencies like NBI, PIDEA, na nagkakandak ng mga examinations and nag-a-appear sa court to testify on the examinations they have conducted. And then any science used for the purpose of the law can be called forensic science. So, it is an application of scientific principles to criminal and civil laws that are enforced by the police agencies and other law enforcement agencies in a criminal justice system. So, you being a criminology students, you know what criminal justice system is. Diba? So, nandyan yung mga courts, correction, law enforcement, prosecution. Okay? So, kayo bilang community also and students of criminology are part of the criminal justice system. So, this is Dr. Edmund Locard. He is a criminologist and was tagged as the father of modern forensics. Then, what is forensic chemistry, which is our subject or your subject? A branch of criminalistics and defined as a branch of chemistry. So, dalawang joint subject siya, chemistry and criminalistics, that deals with the application of chemical theories and principles in the solution of legal problems in connection with the administration of justice. It is an interdisciplinary field of chemistry tasked to solve cases that can only be explained or resolved by applying analytical methods of investigation and instrumentation. So, medyo scientific yung term niya, hindi lang basta-basta mag-investigate. Merong gumagamit tayo ng mga methods, processes, and instruments para makapunta tayo dun sa conclusions natin. Okay? On the other hand, forensic toxicology is the use of toxicology to aid medical legal investigation of death and poisoning. There is a considerable overlap between forensic toxicology and clinical toxicology. Criminology, forensic psychology, drug testing, environmental toxicology, pathology, pharmacology, sports medicine, and veterinary toxicology. So, sa mga nabanggit na sciences na yan, usually, ine-examine kung ano yung stomach content, ano yung mga andon na chemicals or medicines present. For example, dangerous drugs, if ever meron. Yun. So, if you have watched Netflix, yung crime scene na documentary series, The Vanishing at Hotel Cecil, maybe you'll have some understanding kung ano yung mga ginagawa sa autopsy. For example, inaalam ko ano yung present sa blood or sa other fluids in the body, or maybe yung pinaka-recent na happening sa investigations natin, yung sa kay Dacera case. So, merong mga naging problems doon, but aside from the stomach content na hindi na pwedeng ma-examine, so kumuha ng fluid, vitreous fluid, yung fluid sa eyes na hindi naapektuhan ng pang-embalm, at yun yung ginamit for examination para ma-determine kung ano-ano yung present na chemicals or medicines dun sa body ni Christine Dacera. If you're reading the news, okay? So next, si Professor Matthew Orfila. These are the scientists that contribute to the efficiency of forensic science. So si Professor Matthew Orfila is a chemist and he's known as the father of modern forensic toxicology. So he was known as such because he testified in court as expert witness against Madame Marie Lafarge after poisoning her husband Charles with arsenic. So at first kasi hindi alam yung hindi alam yung cause of death ni Charles Lafarge, although an autopsy was conducted, and then toxicology was also conducted, and dun nalaman na mayroong presence ng arsenic in little amounts kasi unti-unting nilalaso nung ni Madame Marie Lafarge, yung asawa niya, naglalagay siya ng arsenic siguro sa pagkain, like that. So, that is the importance of toxicology. So, if we do not, and autopsy as well, if we do not know the real cause of death, at saka medyo questioned yung death niya, so, pwede nating malaman ano ba talaga yung present dun sa katawan niya na nag-cause ng death niya. Okay? So, as a forensic chemist, the responsibilities are as follows: to perform identification of dangerous drugs, volatile substances, explosives, and explosive ingredients. Forensic chemists also conduct examination of gunshot residues and examination of body fluids for any degree of intoxication of alcohols, drugs, and poisons. So ako as forensic chemist, I conduct those tests and examinations depending on the request being forwarded to our office by the requesting parties. So, yun yung authority namin na mag-conduct ng examination kapag mayroong request yung mga law enforcement agencies natin with the accompanying specimen. So, these are the methods which are used by a forensic chemist. To examine, evaluate, and identify physical evidence, the forensic chemist utilizes chemicals and other analytical techniques such as chromatography and spectroscopy. So, chromatography is a method used to separate and identify different components by absorbing components in an adsorbent and eluent. So, yung gas chromatography or GC, high pressure liquid chromatography, HPLC, liquid chromatography, paper chromatography, and thin layer chromatography are examples of chromatography methods. So, sa laboratory natin, medyo wala pa kaming instruments. That's why we're applying thin layer chromatography. So, ang ginagamit lang namin is TLC plates, and then yung mga chemicals or solvent systems, nagpe-prepare kami, and that is used for our confirmatory examinations. Yung mga, so sa isang examination namin, for example, sa drugs, merong step-by-step processes yun para ma-determine namin yung presence and identification of dangerous drugs. So, isa-isahin natin yan pag nakapunta na tayo dun sa dangerous drugs na topic natin. Okay? Spectroscopy, on the other hand, is a method that uses electromagnetic spectrum to analyze different substances. So, ang examples naman yan ay infrared, ultraviolet and visible, nuclear magnetic resonance. Okay? So, sa practice of forensic chemistry, ninonote din namin yung not only the examination, but of course, it starts with the collection or reception of specimen to be examined. So, walang mag-start na examination kung wala kaming makokollect or mare-receive na specimen to be examined. And then, after that, proper scrutiny, i-check yung mga labels, yung markings, yung packaging para makita if there are any kung merong mga contamination na nangyari or natapon, napalitan. Kaya very important yung packaging and then the labeling and marking of the specimens for the identification of each specimen. Then afterwards, the actual examination of the specimen, which sometimes include the weighing of the specimen and going through the screening test and then to the confirmatory testing, and then you will finally arrive at your conclusion. And when you have your conclusion already, you can report or write the report of the result of your examination, which is very important for the investigators to file their cases on court. And then, pag na-file na yung cases nila sa court, as a forensic chemist, you will do court appearances and testify on the examinations that you have made on the specimens. So, what are being considered in the reception of the specimen? So, importante yung sufficiency of samples. Kailangan enough siya para makapag-conduct ka lahat ng step-by-step ng examinations mo. Kasi hindi mo matatapos yung examination kung hanggang sa screening ka lang yung specimen na na-receive mo. And then, syempre, dapat meron kang standard for comparison. Lahat ng examinations na kinakonduct natin, it is always conducted side by side with a standard for comparison. And then, maintenance of individuality. Yun nga sabi ko sa packaging. So, different evidence is separately packed to avoid contamination. Then, the labels and seals which are used to identify the specimen in court. This in court presentation and to eliminate the possibility of the tampering of evidence. So, important din dyan yung chain of custody natin. Kung saan makikita yung kung sino-sino yung nag-handle doon sa specimen. And then the information in the labels should contain the nature and source of sample, the date and time of collection, the case number if any, and the name of the person collecting the sample. Usually, ang nilalagay na lang is yung initials. Basta, always sure na yung person na nag-collect ng sample will be able to identify the specimen, especially in court, with his initials. What is a chain of custody? So, nabanggit ko kanina, importante rin yung chain of custody. This is a list of all persons who came into possession of an item of evidence. In establishing the chain of custody, specimen packages must be marked with information that is sufficient to ensure identification by the officer in future legal proceedings, and to withstand all the inquiries of what happened to the specimen from the time of its finding to its presentation in court. So, yan yung importance ng chain of custody. Actually, isa siyang document kung saan makikita doon kung sino ba yung unang naka-acquire ng specimen, kanino niya tinransfer yung possession, and then afterwards, sino yung nag-handle, sino yung nag-examine, until kung sino yung magdadala sa court. So, what are the golden rules in the practice of forensic chemistry? So, as a chemist or as an examiner, you have to go slowly. Take all the time to make the test complete, no matter how urgent or pressure is given to release the result. So, dapat hindi tayo ma-pressure as examiners kasi kung hindi natin matatapos at magagawa ng maayos yung examination natin, hindi natin makukuha yung tamang result. So, and be sure before you start with your examination na kompleto lahat ng kailangan yung reagents or chemicals and lahat ng glasswares or yung mga kailangan yung gamitin sa laboratory para hindi maantala or ma-pause yung examination nyo. And then next is be thorough. You have to make careful observations and conduct all sufficient analyses. So, especially dun sa qualitative analysis na ginagawa in the examination of dangerous drugs, dapat maging observant ka kung ano yung color na napoproduce para alam mo if you're dealing with the right chemicals or tama yung pagkatimpla ng reagents mo dahil tama yung color na lumalabas sa screening tests mo or sa screening and also on the confirmatory examinations. You have also to take down notes sa laboratory notebook or record book para ma-record mo yung observations mo. So, para kapag binalikan mo siya and then you review, meron kang notes para magamit mo. And it's also advisable to consult others, especially those who know the case or have already handled the same cases. So, para magkaroon kayo ng brainstorming, ganun, para meron kang mga references din sa ginagawa mo na examination. It's also advisable to use your imagination. You have to be imaginative and think ahead the outcome of the analysis done. Para kapag nag-think ahead ka, mas madali mo matatapos yung examinations mo. You should avoid complicated theories. Your conclusions or the results of your examination should be explained in layman terms to understand chemical language, especially by non-expert, para maintindihan ng mga non-expert sa field mo, especially kapag pinresent mo yan sa court. Minsan hindi naman yung mga ibang professionals dyan, iba yung pinag-aralan nila na profession. So, hindi yung katulad ng profession na nakuha mo, kaya dapat mas understandable sa kanila, lalo na kung sa mga suspect, dapat maintindihan din nila kung ano yung examination na ginawa mo. There are two general types of examination in forensic chemistry. It is called the qualitative examination and the quantitative examination. So, sa qualitative examination, from the root word quality, it is used to identify the substances present in the sample. So, identification lang yung ginagawa sa qualitative examination. Most of the examinations in dangerous drugs and other specimens being handled in forensic chemistry is qualitative in nature. So, yung sa request kasi usually ng mga law enforcement agencies na nagpapa-examine for the presence of dangerous drugs is only to determine the presence. So, i-identify mo kung may present pa din na dangerous drugs sa sample mo. And next is the quantitative examination. So, the root word is quanti. So, it means it is the determination of the percent purity of the sample. So, quantity means number. Kung ilan ba yung, for example, sa qualitative examination, na-determine mo present yung methamphetamine hydrochloride dun sa sample. In the qualitative examination, you have to determine how much or what is the percentage of that methamphetamine hydrochloride which is present in your sample. So, after determining the presence, quantitative analysis usually comes next, which is to determine how much or yung quantity ng methamphetamine hydrochloride dun sa sample. Kasi usually, hindi naman yan, yung isang sample, for example, isang sachet ng white crystalline substance, then na-determine mo na may presence ng shabu doon or methamphetamine hydrochloride. You cannot say na all of those white crystalline substance, for example, winay mo siya which gave you 5 grams. Not all the 5 grams present in that sachet would be methamphetamine hydrochloride. So, yung ibang nagnegosyo ng ganyan is sinasamahan nila ng mga for example, tawas or other crystalline substances. So, hindi lang siya methamphetamine hydrochloride pure. So, that is why you have to determine the percent purity of the sample. Pero usually, sa examinations na kinakonduct namin, it is only in the in the qualitative examination, only to determine the presence or identification of the dangerous drugs present in the sample. Yung quantitative examination that already needs a court order for a chemist to undergo the quantitative examination or to determine the percent purity of the sample. Okay. Next is physical evidence. What is actually the so-called physical evidence? So, It is composed of any or all objects that can establish that a crime has been committed or can provide a link between a crime and its victim or a crime and its perpetrator. This includes hair, fibers, firearms, bullet bullet cartridges, cartridge cases, um, drug specimens, explosives, debris, paint, glass, soil, blood, urine, and other biological substances. So, in short, ito yung mga usually natatagpuan natin sa crime scene na pwede natin magamit as evidence that there is really a crime that happened and that would link a suspect or a victim to that crime. Okay. So, these are the common terms in naming physical evidence. The first one is exhibit, an object or document used as evidence to be presented in court. Usually, ang nagsasabi ng mga exhibit, yung mga IOC. Yun usually yung nilalagay nila sa labels nila as Exhibit A, Exhibit B, and also sa court. This is exhibit. Sa pagmark ng evidence, ng documents, even the samples or specimens, usually ginagamit nila is exhibit. Yung terminology naman na specimen, this is the usual term of chemists in the laboratory, composed of the whole bulk of evidence. So, yung pina-examine, for example, in one case, pero yung pina-examine na 13 sachets, yun yung tinatawag namin na specimen. And the next, usually yung wordings ng chemist ay specimen lang and not exhibit. So, next is sample. Sample naman is a part selected from the evidence for laboratory examination, usually called the representative sample. For example, in one sachet, hindi naman at meron siyang 5 grams or 1 gram na white crystalline substance, hindi naman lahat-lahat yun i-consume ng forensic chemist or ng examiner to be used for the examination. Hindi lahat gagamitin. Usually, a minimum amount will be enough for the examination. That is what we call the representative sample. So, konti lang kasi yung mga ginagamit natin na laboratory techniques and examinations or processes and methods are very specific and very sensitive na kahit konti lang na or minute na piece ng sample ng evidence na ginagamit natin is enough para ma-determine natin yung presence ng dangerous drugs. Next, these are the classification of examining physical evidence. So, we have the identification. This is the determination of physical and chemical identity of a substance. This employs standard and specific tests. So, sa examination ng dangerous drugs, usually, ang type of examination or class ng examination is identification because we have to determine the presence of dangerous drugs. Another one is comparison. This is done by subjecting question specimen and control specimen to the same test for the purpose of determining whether or not they have the same origin. Itong comparison usually ginagawa siya ng mga ballisticians or firearm examiner. Kapag may nakuhang fired cartridge case sa crime scene, hindi nila ina-identify agad-agad yon. Hindi mo ma-identify without what do you call this? Standard specimen. So, kapag may firearm na recover sa crime scene, yun ang gagamitin nila pag fire ng known sample of a bullet. So, that is known, that will be the standard. So, your question, yung nakuha sa crime scene, will be compared side by side with a standard or a known sample using a comparison microscope. So, pagtatabihin yon, makikita if there are any differences or similarities in the two specimens. Okay? So, sa amin naman, identification sa dangerous drugs, you will use the dangerous drugs and first screen it, and then if you are going through confirmatory, you will also use the standard, and you will identify if your sample is the same with your standard. Okay? So, these are the characteristics of a physical evidence in making a comparison. So, sa comparison examination to, meron tayong tinatawag na individual characteristics. These are attributed from a common source with an extremely high degree of certainty. So, next is class characteristics, the property of evidence that can only be associated with a group and never with a single source. The property is the same throughout the whole group, not by a single specimen. So, for example sa footprints or shoe print, yung shoe print na nakita mo is a characteristic of a class, merong tatak na Nike. So, that is a class characteristic, lalo na yung mga pattern dun sa shoe print, makikita mo na characteristic ng isang Nike model na rubber shoes, for example. So, that is called a class characteristic. So, it belongs to a group or property that is associated with a group but not a single source. If in that shoe print, you will see a dent. For example, may hiwa yung shoe print na nakita mo. Okay, tama yung pattern niya, belonging to a class. And then, meron hiwa sa gilid that does not belong to a class. That is an individual characteristic of that shoe print. Meaning, it can only belong to one person. Bakit nagkaroon ng dent or hiwa dun sa shoe print niya? So, it can determine if yung mga activities, pwedeng ma-determine yung activities ng owner ng shoe print na yon. So, that can point to an individual characteristic. So, merong mga ganyang stories na before na nahuli yung suspect because of the individual characteristic of the evidence that have been found in the crime scene. And after examination, na-determine yung class characteristic, and more thorough examination have determined individual characteristic that can only belong to one person. So, yun yung difference ng physical evidence, lalo na sa comparison. Okay? So, that is the end of the discussion. That is only for the basic concepts of forensic chemistry. For your class activity, I will post the activity on our Google Classroom, and please submit it on or before 2 o'clock this afternoon. Thank you. If you have any questions, please feel free to message me or ask me, and I will discuss it with you so that you will be able to understand it. Okay, thank you.